Hey there, my name is Andrew, and today I'll be talking about radiotherapy and social functioning in survivors of pediatric brain tumor. And so let's start with a little background first. Brain tumors are actually the second most common cancer in children, following just behind leukemia. In the last few decades, the 5-year survival rates have skyrocketed from 20% to 84%. But unfortunately, these cancer treatments can be quite toxic, leading to consequences known as late effects. And for this study, we will focus on social functioning in particular, which include difficulties with things like making friends or pursuing higher education. But the emphasis here is that an ever increasing number of children are being impacted by these late effects. And so we are studying radiation specifically because past research has linked it to poorer cognitive abilities, but not much is known about social outcomes. And that is why there are two research questions I would like to explore today. One, how does treatment intensity impact social outcomes, with the objective to determine radiotherapy's relationship with adverse social outcomes? And two, are there any moderating variables affecting this relationship? The objective being this time to determine which variables, if any, are moderating this relationship between the two. And so the overarching objective, though, is to explore the etiology of deficits in social outcomes for these survivors. And as for my hypotheses, I predicted that increased treatment intensity will correlate to lower social outcomes and that the cognitive abilities may moderate this relationship. This is supported by the social competence model, which suggests that things like radiotherapy can influence broader psychosocial outcomes. And so for the methods, let's start with the population. 30 survivors of pediatric brain tumor were recruited from Alberta Children's Hospital, and participants were relatively balanced in terms of the radiation condition and sex. To touch upon the exclusion criteria, participants were excluded if they had experienced cancer relapse, thus receiving twice the treatment, or if they had severe cognitive deficits hindering their ability to participate, and so on. But moving on, let's talk about the various measures. Treatment intensity was broken down into receiving radiation or not, the location, and the dose. Social outcomes was operationalized as social withdrawal, pretty self-explanatory. Cognitive processes were operationalized into three components. The first being affect recognition, which is the ability to recognize facial emotions. Then theory of mind, which is understanding that others have unique thoughts from yourself. And lastly, global executive functioning, which examines general cognitive processing. And so from there, participants had their behavioral assessments and questionnaires completed by their parents. Clinical information was then retrieved from patients' medical charts for data analyses. And what analysis found was that increased radiation dose correlated to increased social withdrawal, decreased affect recognition, and decreased theory of mind. Now, there are subtle nuances depending on the radiation location, but that's not the focus today. Next, an ANOVA was run, and it found that those who had received radiation were significantly more likely to have increased levels of social withdrawal. Lastly, a moderating analysis found that increased radiation was related to poor social outcomes, and the cognitive processes did moderate this such that lower cognitive outcomes are linked to lower social outcomes as well. What this ultimately means is that increased treatment intensity is linked to social deficits, and the cognitive processes do appear to moderate it. So the implications that follow is that with a better understanding of these complex relationships, it may help guide us towards developing clinical interventions. That being said, there are limitations that must be considered. For instance, a small sample size means a decrease in statistical power, or the exclusion criteria meant that arguably the most impacted children were ineligible to participate in the study. But from here, there are lots of opportunities for future research, such as examining other social outcomes beyond just social withdrawal, or exploiting other treatment modalities like chemo as well. And that's a quick intro to my research. So I just want to say a huge thank you to my supervisor, Dr. Fiona Schulte, and the amazing Care for Kids Lab for all their support and guidance. Now I'll flash the references on screen and conclude by saying thank you for all of you for listening to this. Take care now.